Oracle is in the news. We're not talking about Oracle a lot, but oh my gosh, they just made everybody's eyeballs pop out of their head. And I think it put Larry Ellison into the number one slot of the world's richest man, if I recall correctly, Jaeden. But the partnerships between these huge organizations is always a little bit staggering because you can never tell where they're going. So the couple that we want to talk about today are OpenAI and Oracle, that huge partnership. But the other one that's just sort of emerged is this really interesting one between Microsoft and Anthropic, where Microsoft could potentially be using Claude, which is, I don't want to say like, oh, drama between Microsoft and OpenAI, but I will say that's not, I think, where anybody saw this going, a year and a half ago. So a couple of big stories that I think really have huge implications, especially if you're a Copilot user, especially if you're a ChatGPT user. This is all really cool. By the way, when we're talking about all these different models and which one is better, do you use Copilot or Claude or Gemini or Grok or ChatGPT? The best way to do this, by the way, guys, I've said this before, Jaden's AIbox.ai, $19 a month, and you can just compare all the models together. It's amazing. Again, like one of the top things that I do with this is just putting in one prompt, and then you see how Claude gives you a response, how Gemini gives you a response, because I'm doing that anyway. And yet I'm paying for all the pro versions of these models. Same with image generation, everything. It's a really, really just awesome tool. Go check it out. But Jaeden, you were talking a lot about this sort of before we got on, especially the Oracle numbers around this were absolutely shocking. But yeah, what was sort of like catching your attention on this? Because I thought it was a pretty cool story.
Okay, well, the first thing I obviously have to share in this is the Forbes real-time billionaire list, because basically the shock to the stock price of Oracle sent Larry Ellison to be number one as the richest man in the world. I think things have calmed down. You kind of see the initial spike. And so now Elon Musk is again number one with 440 billion. Larry Ellison's at 370 billion. But it is pretty wild how like this one announcement and this one deal could change things that much. Larry Ellison, of course, has been a billionaire for a long time, but like Oracle has just seen a massive surge. People realize they were one of the biggest players with the compute that AI needed. And it feels like a lot of the picks and shovels companies are the ones that are NVIDIA and Oracle are making out like bandits in this whole AI space. So I do think that's really interesting. As far as the story goes, this is not a completely new concept, I would say, because OpenAI basically promised they're going to spend $500 billion on the Stargate project. They went and did their big, if you remember, their big unveiling with SoftBank and Oracle and Sam
Trump
Altman
was there and everything, yeah,
at the White House with Trump. So yeah, they did the whole thing, and they said they're going to do $500 billion, which it's so funny. All these companies when they go to the White House. I don't know if you saw the most recent one, where it was like Trump and all the tech CEOs. I think it was just this week.
I couldn't watch it.
It was so funny. He's like, so Tim Cook, how much you guys spending? He's like, 600 billion. He's like, what about you, Mark Zuckerberg? He's like stuttering. He's like, sir, we're gonna spend 600
billion and $1.
I know. They go over to Microsoft. He's like 80 billion a year, and everyone's like, change. So funny. Okay, so obviously it's all very funny, and I think a lot of people debated whether OpenAI was actually capable of spending the 500 billion. They have SoftBank behind them, I think, for a lot of the financing. Anyways, like I remember when that announcement happened, people were questioning it. And then even today, I do think there's a couple interesting things. The first one is that, so OpenAI said, Oracle's like, okay, OpenAI signed a deal. They're going to give us $300 billion. OpenAI doesn't currently have $300 billion, and Oracle doesn't currently have $300 billion worth of chips. So nobody has anything at this point. It's like a vapor deal. I mean, I know this is kind of extreme, but the thing that's interesting is this deal doesn't like basically happen till 2027. So you have 2 years. So basically, I think OpenAI is like 2 years, we can make a lot of money and then. And Oracle's like 2 years, yeah, we could we could buy a lot of chips before then. I think it's important though, like why did the deal happen now? Why don't they just do it, like kind of announce it closer to when it's more solidified, they got more money, they have more resources? I think basically we are at a very interesting point in this entire AI hype cycle where we squeezed money out of like investors. Okay, VCs a lot of them don't have they don't have these kind of $300 billion checkbooks. A lot of them, smaller ones. I mean, we're seeing the huge companies that are putting money into this. And then we went to corporate, right? It's like NVIDIA and Google and these massive companies that are making the big investments because those are the only ones with money left. And then we moved to just most recently, I feel like the next tier, then Anthropic raised money, and they had to raise money from the sovereign wealth fund of Qatar, and their
Yes.
CEO literally came up
Oh,
and was like, yeah, like I don't really like having to take money from bad dictators, the bad
so
guys, but
weird.
sometimes you have to do that. First of all,
That
that's
was
just
so
like the
weird.
most ridiculous thing, to take money from someone and call them bad guys. I mean, it's just crazy. But it basically, I think the reason I bring that up is because that was the next tier. It was corporations, and now it is countries. Entire countries are having to fund this. And
Mhm.
now it's like we need these cloud, I don't know, cloud contracts, for all intents and purposes, where basically they're saying we want to buy this much, and then Oracle's like, okay, we have a signed deal for 300 billion. They should be able to get the financing and the chips they need to basically build out that infrastructure. So it's like the LOI, the letter of intent to do this deal, is almost what is fueling them to be able to do the deal. You know what I mean? Like they have to make
Yep.
the announcement so their investors can give them more money, so their stock
Yep.
price runs up, so that like they actually can
Yeah.
execute on this, which is so interesting to me.
Yeah, there's I mean, the amount of money is of course it's staggering, but especially when Anthropic, who had sort of really gone out of their way to say that they wouldn't do this, all of a sudden does it. Also Anthropic, who I'm going to talk about in a second, changing their terms and conditions to say, actually, if we could train on your data, it would be great. Thanks. And by the way, huge Anthropic fan. Absolutely love Claude. Claude, the only thing I hate about Claude is the rate limits. I'm like, I will pay more
Yeah.
if you just give me more, and it just doesn't do it, which has me turning to Gemini all the time these days. But the other thing on this, Jaden, the other side of this story to me was this Microsoft and Anthropic partnership, right? So as we know, like Microsoft is the biggest investor in OpenAI, had been for a while. But what they are finding is, as that, I don't want to say that that relationship is fraying. I just think it's the way that business works. But
Yeah.
Anthropic has this incredible model in Sonnet 4, right? And it outperforms GPT-5 in certain elements. Now, apparently, like what I'm hearing, and Jaden, I haven't tried this yet, but like there's, because I don't do PowerPoints in these tools. I just don't think they turn out well. But what I'm hearing a lot from Claude is that, hey, the way they do PowerPoints are better. The way their new Excel functions are phenomenal. All the things that Microsoft is really trying to solve with Copilot and hasn't really cracked that nut yet. Claude is sort of swooping in and saying, hey, we can do this really, really well. Now, the really weird thing about this is that one of Microsoft's obviously hugest moneymakers is, Azure. It's right. It's their cloud services, and they are going to. Microsoft now has to pay AWS, which may be the biggest, Amazon's, obviously thing, which is maybe the biggest one, because Claude is, Amazon's a huge investor in Anthropic, right? To the tune of, I don't know, it's got to be $8 or $9 billion at this point, right?
Yep.
And that's where Claude is hosted. So instead of running everything through Azure with OpenAI, they're actually paying rivals all over the place. But this is this bet to be, are we going to be the best? And I think AWS actually did this pretty well early on, which they're like, hey, we don't care. Just come in, use any tool. And I think that's where, as this competition kind of quote unquote is heating up, Microsoft knows that it has a window here, right? Everybody's already on enterprise. Microsoft is the adult in the room when it comes to enterprise AI and everything like that. But if they're getting outshined by OpenAI, or they're getting outshined by Anthropic, they cannot afford to have those systems, or Google, of course, to have those systems create their own PowerPoints and Excels and things like that, and even risk losing any of that market share. So this feels like a smart play by them to me. I don't know.
100%. I mean, I think basically they're realizing what the thesis of AI Box was that I built, which is basically every model has its own unique
Right.
competitive advantages. Like my developers won't touch OpenAI's codex because they're like, it's just not as good at writing code. So we have Claude Code that reads our whole thing. And like every single model has like its different flavors of its strengths. And it's actually really interesting sometimes to see where these come from. One of those, which I think is kind of funny, if you've been keeping up with Anthropic in the last little bit, you'll see that they just got ordered to pay a $1.5 billion
Yeah.
copyright penalty.
Unbelievable.
Not
Yeah.
because they trained off of everyone's data, because the judge is like, no, that's fine. That's fair use. But because they used 1 million pirated books. They just because it's a really fast way to get. Anyways, one thing that I thought is like really interesting, Connor, because I know you love Anthropic, and I tell people this all the time. You are an author. You love Anthropic because it has an amazing tone. But what's interesting is it has that great tone because they grabbed 1 million pirated books into their.
Don't make me feel bad. No, I refuse. Don't make me feel bad about this now, Jay. Now, like all of a sudden, I'm living with like guilt. They paid their money. It's okay. Yeah,
I know.
God, it's such a good. Wait, hold on. This is such a good point because Anthropic. Remember what Arvind Srinivas used to say, the head of Perplexity. He's like, hey man, and Jaden, you used to talk about this too as a software developer. You're like, Arvind Srinivas from Perplexity was like, yeah, we're going to steal everything, man, because they were small. And now you were just telling me offline, Perplexity's what, valued at like 20 billion. Anthropic was doing all this when they were like, we'll never compete with the big boys. Nobody's ever. And now all of a sudden, Anthropic is top 3, call it, right? Top 3, certainly top 4. And now they're like, oh shoot, we have this. So you know what Anthropic tried to do, right? They tried to go back and buy all those books retroactively. So like, no, here are the real copies. Like, man, you can't. What are you doing? But look, a lot of people I think the authors or Anthropic got off easy with that. Anyway, so I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I do love how AI Box does that, where you're like, look, there's some tools that are better than other tools, and what AI Box, what I love about it is that it allows you to compare those things. But yeah, don't make me feel bad. I refuse this guilt trip that you're giving me right now, by the way.
On behalf of all writers in the world, Conor has been promoting the piracy platform. No, I mean, I think at the end of the day, no one knows what all of these AI models' competitive edges. OpenAI kind of refused to say if they used YouTube to train Sora. And obviously, that means that they did, right? Everyone's trying to get their competitive edges and steal everything to make their AI model the best that it can be. But consequently, depending on how much risk different platforms are willing to take, we do see greatly different outcomes in the quality that some of these AI models are. So anyways, Microsoft has seen this, which is, it's just funny where the competitive edge comes from. That doesn't really matter at this point. What matters is like, cat's out of the bag. Anthropic is the best at a few tasks, and you don't want to get left behind in those tasks. You need Anthropic to power those for you. So I do think this is interesting. I think it's going to be a trend we'll see across the entire industry, where like a lot of software companies have relied heavily on API access to OpenAI's tools. And I think we'll probably get to a place where instead of building your entire company, your entire stack of tools on one particular AI model, you'll probably use a couple different AI models depending on what the task is. And you'll also probably build in the capability to switch. I think smart software companies is what we're doing at AI Box. Even with like AI Box, because we're building this whole platform where you can actually build AI tools inside of our platform. We're giving like creators the ability to just go, oh, you know, the newest version of Anthropic came out, or the newest version of ChatGPT came out. You could just click a button and switch what model is powering your whole tool or your workflow. And I think this is where we're going to see a lot of, I think if Microsoft is doing it, we're going to see most savvy software companies doing this in the near future. So absolutely fascinating.
That's so right. And I love that. I love that you're doing that at AI Box. I think it's really cool. And I think that what I've heard from kind of behind the scenes at some of the really, really huge enterprise providers, which I won't name names because I don't know if I have this exactly right, but I was having some conversations kind of backstage with them, and they're saying this is what they're aiming for too. Do you know what I mean? Like, especially because AWS allows, you know, with your Bedrock just allows you to use a lot of different tools, and it will help people soon. I don't even know if, I don't know, people will have their own sort of affiliation and their favorite thing and all that kind of stuff. But you and I talk about this all the time. Like, I use ChatGPT for one thing, I use Gemini for another, I use Claude for another, I use Grok for another. But that comes from serious power usage. I never even try to get people thinking that way, because then they start thinking, oh, which is the best? I'm like, it doesn't really work like that. Listen, I'm keeping an eye on this, because whatever makes Copilot better, I'm psyched about. Love all these brands, I really do, but I'm, you know, that's me. Listen, folks, if you're up for it, we would love it if you left a rating and review. We know we ask you this all the time, but it really does help with our credibility about getting great guests on. Helps Jaeden and I personally. We just do this because we love to do it, and it is one thing that if you're willing to, would really just make our hearts soar. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time.